Why you hate in others what you hide in yourself. There's someone who drives you crazy. Maybe it's a coworker who's always showing off. A friend who makes everything about herself. A family member who's so needy it suffocates you. A public figure whose arrogance makes your blood boil. You can't stand them. Something about them gets under your skin in a way you can't fully explain. It's not just dislike. It's something deeper. Something almost physical. You tell yourself it's because they're wrong. They're toxic. They're too much. But what if the intensity of your reaction has nothing to do with them? What if they're showing you something about yourself, something you've buried so deep you forgot it was there? Today, we're going to explore one of the most uncomfortable truths in psychology. The idea that the people who trigger us most are mirrors. And what we hate in them is often what we've rejected in ourselves. This is the psychology of projection. And understanding it might change every relationship you have. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who founded analytical psychology, observed something strange in his patients. The qualities they most despised in others were often the same qualities they refused to acknowledge in themselves. He called this projection. The unconscious act of taking something inside yourself, a trait, a desire, a fear, and seeing it in someone else instead. Projection isn't lying. It's not pretending. It's completely unconscious. You genuinely believe the problem is out there, in that other person. You have no idea you're looking at a mirror. Jung connected this to his concept of the shadow, the hidden part of the psyche that contains everything you've rejected about yourself. Everything you were taught was unacceptable. Everything that didn't fit the image of who you're supposed to be. The shadow doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. It finds other ways to express itself. And one of the main ways is projection. Here's how it works. As a child, you learned what was acceptable and what wasn't. Some traits were rewarded, being polite, being humble, being selfless. Other traits were punished, being angry, being selfish, being too confident. The traits that were punished didn't go away. You just disowned them. You pushed them into the basement of your psyche and locked the door. But they're still alive down there. Still part of you. And they want to be seen. So when you encounter someone who openly displays what you've hidden, your psyche reacts strongly. Because that person is living out the very thing you forbade yourself. Let's make this concrete. You can't stand people who are selfish. They disgust you. You've built your entire identity around being giving, selfless, always there for others. But what if, deep down, there's a part of you that wants to be selfish sometimes? A part that's tired of always giving? A part that wants to take, to receive, to put yourself first? You'd never admit it. It contradicts everything you believe about yourself. So you bury it. And then you encounter someone who takes freely, who puts themselves first without apology, and you feel rage. That rage isn't really about them. It's about your own forbidden desire that they're expressing freely. Another example. You despise arrogant people. People who think they're special. Who take up space. Who act like they matter. But what if there's a part of you that also wants to feel special? That also wants to take up space? That also wants to be seen and admired? You learned that wanting attention is shameful. That confidence is arrogance. That thinking well of yourself is narcissistic. So you suppressed it. And now anyone who shows those qualities becomes a target for your contempt. You're not really hating them. You're hating the part of yourself you never allowed to exist. Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's closest collaborator, put it simply. If you feel an overwhelming emotion toward someone, especially judgment or hatred, you're probably looking at your own shadow. The keyword is overwhelming. Not every dislike is projection. Some people are genuinely harmful, and your reaction to them is appropriate. But when the emotion is disproportionate, when you can't stop thinking about how much someone bothers you, that's a sign. The intensity is coming from inside. They've touched something unhealed. There's a simple test. Think about someone who really triggers you. Now ask, what specifically bothers me about them? Write it down. Be specific. They're so attention-seeking. They think they're better than everyone. They're so aggressive. They're weak and needy. They're fake. Now comes the hard part. Ask yourself, where is this quality in me? Not am I exactly like them, that's too easy to dismiss. But where does this quality exist in some form, perhaps hidden, perhaps suppressed? If you hate attention seekers, where do you crave attention but won't admit it? If you hate arrogance, where do you want to feel special but have forbidden it? If you hate aggression, where is your own anger that you've buried? If you hate neediness, where are your own needs that you've disowned? If you hate fakeness, where are you not being authentic? This is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. That's how you know you're getting close to the shadow. The philosopher Robert Bly described it beautifully. He said we spend the first 20 years of our life putting parts of ourselves into a long bag that we drag behind us. Everything that wasn't acceptable goes in the bag. Our anger, our selfishness, our sexuality, our ambition, our vulnerability. And then we spend the rest of our life trying to get those parts back. Projection is what happens when we see our own bag in someone else's hands. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Projection isn't only about negative qualities. We also project our positive shadow, the good things we've disowned. Maybe you were taught that being powerful is dangerous. That being brilliant is showing off. That being beautiful is vain. So you suppress those qualities too. And now when you meet someone powerful, brilliant, or beautiful, you feel something. Maybe admiration that borders on obsession. Maybe jealousy that eats at you. Maybe a strange fascination you can't explain. That's also projection. You're seeing your own unlived potential in them. Jung said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The triggers are teachers. Every strong reaction is an invitation to look inward. This doesn't mean the other person is innocent. They might genuinely be doing something harmful. Both can be true. They can be problematic, and your reaction can be amplified by projection. The goal isn't to excuse bad behavior. The goal is to understand why your reaction is so intense. What nerve did they hit? What forbidden part of you did they activate? When you understand this, everything shifts. First, your relationships improve. When you stop projecting, you start seeing people as they actually are, not as screens for your own unresolved material. You can respond to what's really happening instead of reacting to your own shadow. Second, you reclaim lost parts of yourself. Every projection you withdraw is energy that comes back to you. The aggression you hated in others becomes healthy assertiveness in yourself. The selfishness you despised becomes appropriate self-care. The arrogance you condemned becomes genuine self-worth. Third, you become harder to manipulate. People who don't know their shadow are easy to control. Push their buttons and they react predictably. But when you've integrated your projections, the buttons don't work anymore. You're no longer triggered by the same old patterns. There's an ancient Greek phrase inscribed at the Temple of Delphi. Know thyself. This is what it means. Not just knowing your conscious self, your preferences, your beliefs, your story, but knowing your shadow. Knowing what you've hidden. Knowing what you project. The Sufi poet Rumi wrote, "The art of knowing is knowing what to ignore." But there's a deeper art, knowing what you've ignored about yourself. How do you stop projecting? First, catch yourself in the act. When you feel that surge of irritation, judgment, or hatred, pause. Ask, is this about them or is this about me? The mere act of asking interrupts the automatic reaction. Second, get curious instead of righteous. Righteousness is a sign that the ego is protecting the shadow. When you're absolutely certain you're right and they're wrong, that certainty itself is suspicious. The shadow hides behind moral conviction. Third, do the mirror exercise. For every quality you hate in someone, find it in yourself. This isn't about blame. It's about honesty. The quality might be expressed differently, but it's there in some form. Fourth, talk to the projection. This is a Jungian technique. Imagine that quality as a character. Ask it, what do you want? Why are you here? What am I not seeing? Let it speak. The shadow has wisdom if you listen. Fifth, integrate, don't act out. Integration doesn't mean becoming what you've rejected. It means acknowledging it, making room for it. The goal isn't to become selfish, it's to admit that selfishness exists in you, so it doesn't control you from the dark. The mystics understood this. In every spiritual tradition, there's a teaching about the enemy within. The shadow self. The demon that turns out to be an angel in disguise. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, practitioners visualize wrathful deities, terrifying figures that represent their own inner demons. But these demons aren't to be defeated. They're to be recognized, honored, and transformed. In the Christian mystical tradition, the dark night of the soul is a necessary passage. You must descend into your own darkness before you can reach the light. In the Sufi tradition, the nafs, the ego self with all its hidden desires, must be confronted and integrated, not destroyed. The enemy is not outside. The enemy is the part of yourself you refuse to see. And the moment you see it, it stops being an enemy. It becomes fuel. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The people who trigger you are doing you a favor. They're pointing to the places where you haven't looked. They're illuminating your blind spots. They're offering you pieces of yourself that you threw away. The question isn't why they're so terrible. The question is, what are they showing me about myself? You thought you knew yourself, but you only knew the parts you were willing to see. The rest has been hiding in others, in everyone who annoyed you, threatened you, disgusted you. Maybe it's time to stop pointing fingers and start looking in the mirror. If this resonated, subscribe. This channel is for those who are ready to see what they've been hiding from, who are tired of reacting and ready to understand. In the next video, we explore the unlived life, everything you suppress to fit in, and what happens when you reclaim it.